let's go to Tommy Conlon's piece on the Brian O'Driscoll documentary, and
which I should say I haven't seen. I don't think Paul has seen either. You have seen.
No, I flagged this.
You flagged what?
The Tommy Conlon piece.
You let Gary have
I said it was
anything.
I'm pulling you on something a deliberate.
I'm saying the documentary, not the Tommy Conlon piece.
Sorry.
Have you watched it?
Joe, I'm really sorry. I misunderstood.
Well, that's not good enough for Gary.
Okay.
Right, so we haven't seen the documentary. You have.
Okay, I have seen the documentary. It was excellent, very well produced, and Craig Doyle, who works with Brian, produced it with Sally Brown. Excellent. Well done.
Stop now.
Very well done. But what struck me about the documentary was that me now looking back at O'Driscoll's dilemma when he was captain of Ireland and interviewing Rory Best as now captain of Ireland was the naivety that sportsmen sometimes approach their sport with. And this is from an Irish swimmer that swam in an Irish team with an acting RUC officer and was away on an Irish trip during the 12th of July celebrations, and didn't really understand why he was so happy that day that he was not on duty for the RUC.
What did he say he would have been doing?
He would have been stuck in one of those, Land Rovers, the Land Rovers, policing the divide between Catholics and Protestants, taking Molotov cocktails to the front of the vehicle, and reversing or driving forward as was appropriate. It was just as awful as it was made out on the documentary, and when you realise that, and you say that people who I would have been, would have had a sympathy with the Catholics up the north, and he was a Protestant, and you just go, wow, how could you treat someone else like that? And that came across well in the documentary. There were three basic parts of the documentary. There was the troubles that started in '72, and the very powerful interview with Willie John McBride and David Duckham. There was the next part of it was during the '70s, or during the '80s, and the last part was the Croke Park thing, which I know you're very young, Joe, but you surely remember Croke Park, right?
Yeah.
And it was just fantastically well produced and very emotional, actually. Yeah, it was very emotional.
What was the emotion?
David Duckham was very emotional when he said about Wales and Scotland not coming over to play in '72, and Willie John McBride picking up the phone and just saying to David, "You must come." And that's all he said. And Duckham hangs up the phone and goes, "Oh my God, we've got to go over there and play for them." And the reception they got in Lansdowne Road, as it was at the time, and the reception they got at the post-match dinner really, struck a chord, and they brought that out very well in the documentary.
It's interesting, actually. Our Celtic brothers didn't come in '72, and then you fast forward to very recently, and there was the voting for who'd host the World Cup, and
They've
our Celtic
never
brothers
failed to let us down.
Let us down again, and it was England who voted for Ireland to host the World Cup.
Exactly,
Brief
and they're
aside.
very honourable, and hats off to them. But
England.
Yes, England. The car, the explosion where Judge Morris Gibson and his wife Cecily were killed in the explosion at the time when the three rugby players were coming down to engage in a training session for the Irish team, Nigel Carr, David Irwin and Philip Rainey.
Yeah. This was in '87.
That was dealt with extremely well, and Brian was in the spot where the explosion went off. Now, I'm not saying that the IRFU were responsible. They weren't as responsible for the Good Friday Agreement as Bertie Ahern and Tony Blair.
Can I stop you? I just want to ask you something. You said something really interesting right at the start. I'm really interested that you should develop. And that's in O'Driscoll's part in this, and his naivety with regard to playing with Best.
Yes.
And what he discovered. Yeah.
I got the impression from Brian talking to Rory that they'd never sat down and had this talk. Yeah. When Brian was the captain of Ireland and Rory was playing for Ireland, and Brian had never engaged with any Northern or Ulster players that had come down.
How many Southern people do that? Have that conversation? And how many of us understand what it is like to live up there?
I don't think we could have done during the Troubles, right? But Brian was captain of Ireland after the Troubles as well. I was swimming with an RUC officer during the Troubles.
Yeah.
And were it not for the fact that he was so elated at one day on the 12th of July and he was skipping into lunch saying, you know, you guess where I would be today, it hadn't struck me that it was the 12th of July. And
Did you
yet,
swim up there?
oh yes.
During the
Oh my
Troubles?
God, did I swim up there? I hated it. I hated going up there. I hated I just felt uncomfortable up there. And they were always more than welcoming. And, you know, but I always got the impression that I was a foreigner. So they used to have the Irish Nationals up in Belfast. They could play.
You got that sense, did you?
Yeah, and
Well,
they could play God Save the Queen before the Irish Nationals up in Belfast, and we'd come and compete for the Irish national title. And you know, it sounds terrible, but I never was comfortable swimming up there.
That's really interesting, and an absolute contrast to my experiences there. So we were at the Open up in Donegal this year, and I drove through the north to get there, and I stopped off in a little small town called Market Hill, which is not too far outside Newry. And I stopped off in Market Hill to have a look around, because in 1962, the year I was born, my father won the Irish National Road Race Championships in Market Hill. And I stopped there during the summer, and even to this day, I was astonished by the amount of Union Jacks everywhere. I mean, this is only like 20 minutes out of Newry, and you go into this place, Market Hill, and just Union Jacks everywhere. And I kind of thought, but Jesus, what must that have been like back in 62 when my dad was racing up here? Now, I had that experience as well during the worst of the Troubles. We went up regularly to Belfast, to Banbridge, and raced in the north. There were all these great roads, much better roads than, and it's actually the inverse now, that we've better roads down here than they had up there, but all these great roads, great racers, great bike riders, but I always felt more, incredibly welcome by the guys I was racing with. I mean, you know, I knew, some of them were RUC officers, never any sense, actually an appreciation that we were going up there and we were racing. New guys who had been locked up as nationalists, Republicans, again, both sides, and it was, and these guys were racing with each other, and there was never any sense when they were racing, when we were competing, of that feeling that you got, you know, that you weren't. It was the complete opposite.
But you're saying you got it from the atmosphere as opposed to the fellow swimmers, or did you get it from the swimmers?
Oh no, not at all.
So that's interesting that your experience and O'Driscoll's and the rugby experience is that when sport is there
was a threat. You were always really, I mean, there was always a sigh of relief when you came back across the border. I mean, Jez, you did not know whether you were going to get stopped. We came back at all hours of the night from races, and you know, when you got across the border, it's like, oh Jesus, thank God for that.
And did you talk about it?
Oh, we did, absolutely. I mean, I remember, you mentioned the 12th of July, we were up there, we were racing up in, I think, Newton Ards, and I was with Dave Kane, who was a great bike rider at the time, who raced with my father. I remember Dave actually telling us, look, there could be trouble here, you need to go home that way, you know, to get round it, you know, and warning us of. So there was always a threat there, but from the cycling community, absolutely not. It was just, you were really made welcome, and they were fantastic guys.
You were just sports people. But when Brian went up there, the absolute shock in his face when he saw, or when people were explaining to him, people were taking selfies with him or getting their photo with him. These are guys in the orange sashes and everything else. And Brian was asking them, you know, how do you marry this? You know, you're loyal to the Queen, you're a unionist.
Yeah.
But
how do you feel about Ireland's call?
How do I feel about Ireland's call? Well,
see, from my experiences, I've asked you how, I'm going to tell you how I feel. From my experiences of that, racing up that, Ireland's call has never bothered me. I think, wow, isn't it great that we're playing together? That's a small price to pay for that. I've always understood the sensitivities of that, and I've always said, well, I take my hat off to those guys. Fair play.
I agree with that, yeah.
And I do. And the Ireland's call...
A lot of guys down here don't. They go crazy.
I don't think they're thinking it through.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to dismiss it and say, it's crap. And I know what they mean.
To the point about how many of us up here actually understand.
Well, isn't there a shocking statistic? I think, we're into the millions who haven't actually ever stayed a night up north still.
Yes.
In the south, the millions.
Really?
Yeah, it's
I heard
mad.
you mention that before. But the thing about Brian's documentary, and I heard him talk about the background behind it, and it was something to do with his mum sitting down, and Brian wasn't singing Ireland's Call. So he would sing the Irish national anthem, and he was captain. And then when the Ireland's Call came on, Brian was standing there and wasn't even mouthing the words. And his mum sat him down.
I don't think that's in his autobiography, is it?
But no, he mentioned it on the radio. I don't know, maybe with you guys, but
Well, it better have been. It's an exclusive agreement, Gary.
So, and then his mum sat him down. They had a discussion about it, and she said, "You are captain of all of Ireland.
Yeah.
You must sing the song." So he changed his tune. But what gets me sometimes is that it's not consistent. You know, the bailing out of the national anthem or the singing of the national anthem in the Aviva Stadium is fine, and then it turns to Ireland's Call, and on occasion there are still people who won't sing Ireland's Call. I have seats in the stadium. There are people beside me who still won't sing Ireland's Call, and I sing it.
Yeah.
And I think it is important, but still, you know, the two national anthems, I always feel a little bit embarrassed for the team that come here to Ireland to have to listen to two anthems. You know, they go to break up after the national anthem, and then the band strikes up again and they have to huddle back in together. I only... only here. But anyway, I just think that the Tommy's piece, you know, yes, rugby were great, but they weren't the only sport, as you have just proven, as swimming was as well.
And to be fair, just to mention, Neil O'Riordan in The Sun has written that as well. He's had a look at the documentary and has made that point that, you know, we can overstate things a little bit, maybe.
Not today.
Yeah.
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah. So he's written
overstate
that as well.
what?
The importance of rugby. Like it was great and everything, but it wasn't the only sport which was cross-border.
I think
most sports people looked beyond the politics of the situation, or didn't actually concern themselves with the politics of the situation. It wasn't because of that they looked at the politics, analysed it and said, no, I'm above that. It was just because they couldn't actually care about the politics.
Yeah.
And I think that's what was striking about the documentary, that at the time didn't really concern Brian.
But it wasn't
now that
the important thing for Brian and Rory Best was winning the Six Nations, and that was all they were focused on, and that's why.
Yeah.
Like, it's interesting, you said that, you know, it wasn't an issue with your fellow swimmers, wasn't an issue for your fellow cyclists, because you were working towards what was far more important to you guys, which was your sport. You know.
Well, see, we were in the individual sports.
No, sure.
You know, it's a little bit different.
That's a fair point.
It's a team sport that Brian is engaged in.
He raced for Ireland.
I raced for Ireland with guys who were of the opposite
But
persuasion.
at the same time, you know, Rory Best Rory Best could be hoisting people into the air that have completely different beliefs, and it's just not an issue.
So this has been a wielding discussion. What are we saying here? What's our takeaway points from the O'Driscoll documentary and the Conlon piece?
Okay.
I really enjoyed the documentary, since I'm the only one here that has watched it, and the point that Tommy makes is, it's well done, but there's more to it. It was every single sport as far as...
No, I would slightly disagree with that. I want to first of all pay tribute to Tommy Conlon, okay? I want to pay tribute to him because his column doesn't scream at you. It's across the top of a paper, of a page every week. This is the best piece of writing in any paper this Sunday in sport. This column, absolutely superb. Let's start with opening paragraph.
Yeah.
When BOD strapped on a gargantuan lambeg drum at the Orange Order parade in Loughall last July 12th, all you could see of him was his head poking out above and his shoes sticking out below while he banged away in it with the rhythm of a dancing Theresa May. Isn't that just superb? Larry Mullen's job with U2 is safe for another while. So, you know, what a brilliant way to start. And I know I'm deconstructing it in a way that you wouldn't, but as a writer I do this. So the point we're getting to here is about the IRFU and the GAA and the Irish. He makes three very interesting points about how the governing bodies had dealt with it. The IRFU stood resolutely above the sectarian fray, while the GAA, that other All-Ireland institution, was irretrievably locked into its alliance with Catholicism and nationalism by dint of its long-standing policies, practices and cultures. Great point. The Irish Football Association in Northern Ireland was really the loyalist FA, a pillar of the ruling infrastructure that was rigged top to bottom against the Catholic minority. Down south, the FAI was, as usual, too feeble, too blighted by bad governance to take much of a difference one way or the other. So I think that's a really interesting point in that he makes about how the governing bodies actually dealt with this. But also, he's not, you know, this is not a tip of the hat, unqualified tip at the RFU. He talks about, well, you know, their gene pool and the kind of background they came from, you know, made that easier.
Yeah, but Neil O'Riordan makes that point as well. Actually.
Yeah. He made that easier.
It's a similar social class that play the game both north and south.
Bottom one,
and he argued like O'Driscoll and Best, given that they probably went to, you know, decent schools and probably had more in common in more ways than they might have with people next door to them.
Which is
It's
great
an
point.
interesting point. Yeah.
Well, I would
disagree with
I
that.
would say that Brian didn't go to a decent school at all, but that's I'll leave my prejudices aside. I've got into trouble now because of my prejudices, and I was doing so well before that. Sorry,
Paul.
Yeah. So, but I think it's very concisely written. It's brilliantly written, and again he concludes with O'Driscoll leaving. O'Driscoll left Loughgall on July 12th, a somewhat confused man, and this is kind of going back to the point you made earlier. He'd been hanging out with hardcore unionists, all of whom consider themselves British, and some of whom are rugby fans. Quote, but yet they'll come down to Lansdowne Road, particularly against England, and they'll want to win that game the most. There seems at times that there's no commonality. They don't even have a commonality of what it means to be Irish. But in the stands, they're willing to accept that for Irish rugby, we're a whole country, even for the few hours on a Saturday afternoon. That fills me with a huge sense of pride, and Tommy concludes, as indeed it should. I would wonder about the commonality. I think there is a commonality there. I think it's not just the fact that we're playing England, that we can all, you know.
Oh no, it's there.
I think there's a lot more.
Playing
Again,
any team.
It's a great column, a really great column.
But they're Ulster are massive contributors to the Irish team. The Ulster players that make the Irish team tend to be, you know, super players. You know, they tend to be, you know, Ulster have every reason to be proud of these guys that they push into the Irish team, and the Irish team were extremely lucky to have them. So it's a two-way street, but it always has been that way. It's just the way it is. But when Brian in the documentary, which neither of you have seen and I have seen, and
it's the fourth time you said that. You've taken that
Make
point
you a better
on board.
person.
So when he goes onto his Twitter feed, because someone took a picture and immediately put it up on Twitter of him playing the drum.
Yeah.
When he goes into his Twitter feed, and the amount of abuse he was getting on his Twitter feed, horrendous stuff from people. So the vitriol is still out there, and there are still people who will take to Twitter and just hide behind Twitter. You just go, oh my God, what do you do?
Yeah.